Well, okay, without further ado, we'll proceed to get started with our webinar today. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Deborah Mayfield, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar focused on commute solutions for solo drivers. Let's go to the next slide, Greg. Now, before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping tips. Now, if you locate your chat box while we're proceeding through the webinar, we'll have time for questions and answers. But as we move along, feel free, if a question pops up in your head or a comment, just type that into the chat box right at the bottom of the screen. And also, I need to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and it will be placed online so that those who could not attend today can actually hear this information. Or for those who are attending, you can share it with your colleagues. Next slide. Again, I'm Deborah Mayfield. I'm a Principal Program Coordinator for the Houston-Galveston Area Council. I work in the Travel Demand Management Division, and I help manage the Commute Solutions program. My goal and my role is to build partnerships within our region, and that is with various agencies and companies, including employers and other transportation agencies and government entities. I focus on outreach and education for commute solutions, and my role in travel demand management and telework planning, I provide those services as well to interested employers and our partners. I have over 10 years experience in advocating for clean air. I started out in the Metro Star Van Pool program, and then I entered into transit as a ridership development officer with Metro. And I've been with the Houston-Galveston Area Council for about a year, and I'm loving it because I have the opportunity to work from a regional level with multiple transportation agencies. And right now I hold a telework certification with the best workplaces for commuters. Next slide, Greg. So a quick overview of what we're going to provide for you today. Well, for one thing, the Commute Solutions program, we are sponsored through the Texas Department of Transportation. We get our funding through them, as well as the Federal Highway Administration. Our program covers the 8-county region, and right now this month, we're celebrating 26 years of the Commute Solutions program. Next slide. The goals of Commute Solutions is to increase awareness and travel options and the benefits. We also focus on reducing vehicle miles on our roadways, and also to reduce congestion and improve air quality, and you'll learn more about that. And next slide. So what do you hope to take away today? So let's test out the chat box. If you locate it at the bottom of your screen, something drew you here today. So if you don't mind sharing that, that would be very valuable information for us to help serve you better in the future. So let's pull those chats. Okay. Okay. Okay, Trinae, do you see any responses in the chat box? Okay, there's Olga.
Yes, there's one from Olga Salceda. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. It says, how the pandemic has affected Texas highways.
Okay, that's a good one.
To learn today.
Okay, and you'll see more as we move forward. Next slide, Greg. So our webinar goals today are to share why air quality is important to our region. And we'll have Andrew DeCandis. He is from our air quality division. He will be presenting those details for us today. And we will also explain to you how to make a more positive impact when you're driving alone. And also, we will discuss how employers can support solo driving as well. Next slide, Greg. Okay, this is time now is for Andrew DeCandis. Andrew?
Hi there, everyone. Thank you, and thank you, Deborah. Like Deborah said, my name is Andrew DeCandis. I'm a principal planner at Hgac. I work with our air quality group, and I've been with Hgac for over 8 years now. And I mainly focus on air quality policy issues, but I also work with alternative fuel vehicles. And lately, I've been doing a lot of work with vehicle electrification issues as well. If it has to do with air quality from a policy standpoint, I tend to work on it. Next slide, please. So the question sort of I want to answer as part of my presentation, and we'll keep this pretty short, is why? Why do we care about air quality here in the region? And why does it matter so much? And so next slide. So I figured I would start that off by just giving a very short description of the Houston region. And I know most of you, if not all of you, live here, but you know, just as a starting place, I thought this would be a useful place to start. So at present, the region's population is about 5.9 million people, and we're expected to reach about 10 million by 2040. And the metropolitan area, which we consider the 8-county region that contains Harris County and all of the surrounding counties, is almost 9,000 square miles. And we have a broad base of, a broad corporate base here within the region, and that includes energy related companies. We have over 5,000 of them here in the region, aeronautics, the medical industry, and also other technology industries. And our port, the Port of Houston, is the 10th largest port in the world, and it ranks first in the US in international commerce. So we have we have a lot of economic activity going on within our region. We have a lot of people moving on the roads. We have a lot of people who depend on this region to be able to continue. So next slide, please. So what's Hgac? Hgac, we're a regional organization. We're quasi-governmental. We work with local governments and other stakeholders within the region to address and help find solutions to area-wide problems that are larger than any single region or any single locality or company can address on their own. Some examples of area-wide problems include economic and community development, criminal justice issues, 911 systems, water quality, the regional transportation system, and air quality as one of those issues. And so what we do is, in the air quality part of our job, is that we work with citizens and stakeholders to educate them and to help them make informed choices to support improved air quality and health. And then we work with stakeholders such as local governments or locally based industries to develop and implement voluntary emission reduction efforts. And we've had a lot of success with that. We also support and participate in joint research projects. We've worked with local universities here in the region, University of Houston, Rice University, and outside of the region with Texas A&M and University of Texas on different initiatives. And we work to help develop new funding sources for potential programs. And we help fund things like vehicle replacements and other sorts of things like that to help take old vehicles off the road and replace them with newer and cleaner ones. Next slide, please. So, and in this region, we need to follow federal air quality regulations. And those really started back in 1970 with the passage of the Clean Air Act. And this was the birth of modern air quality regulations in the US. And it established national ambient air quality standards for criteria pollutants. And it was also developed to protect public health and regulate the emissions of hazardous air pollutants in general from both stationary and mobile sources. So I mentioned criteria pollutants. So when I'm talking about criteria pollutants, we're talking about ground level ozone, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and lead. The Clean Air Act was strengthened in 1977 with provisions to ensure that transportation investments conform to the state, conform to federal air quality requirements, which meant that states had to develop a plan if you were not in attainment or if you were not meeting the standard for one of those criteria pollutants. And this plan is called the State Implementation Plan, or SIP for short. And with the 1990 amendments, the Clean Air Act was strengthened further to become, and transportation became heavily involved with the air quality process through a more rigorous process that we know as conformity. So we ensure that any region, any transportation project within the region does not make our air quality worse. And the Clean Air Act requires that these standards are revisited every 5 years to review the science that the standards are based on, as well as the standards themselves, and if appropriate, to revise the standards. So for instance, the initial ozone standard was created in 1991, and there were revisions and decreases of that standard in 1997, 2008, and 2015. And this process was just undertaken again in 2020, and they opted to not decrease the standard any further. Next slide, please. So you may ask, why did I single out the standards for ozone? And that's because our region does not meet the federal standards for ground level ozone under the Clean Air Act. We were classified as non-attainment under both the 2008 and 2015 versions of the standard. And because we are not attaining the standard under the Clean Air Act, regions and states must do work to improve air quality and work to bring the region into attainment. So this results in the creation of programs that result in decreased ozone. And like I said before, we ensure that regional road projects do not increase ozone, and we ensure that we show ongoing and continuous progress towards ozone attainment. Something called anti-backsliding. So we make sure that we're always moving forward. Next slide. And a small discussion about ozone. So, you know, there tends to be a little bit of confusion that we've talked about. If you remember back in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of concerns about the ozone hole in the stratosphere. And in the stratosphere, ozone is good. So why, when we talk about it down here at the ground, why is it not good? And so in the stratosphere, ozone occurs naturally. It's a protective layer. It helps to filter ultraviolet radiation out of sunlight. And so that helps increase things like skin health and safety here at the ground. However, when we're talking about ground level ozone, it's a much different matter because down here in the troposphere, the ground area, the area near the ground, ozone does not form naturally, or it's not emitted naturally. And so it's formed by when there's emissions from vehicles or factories. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Emissions of different chemicals, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds. These are emitted sometimes naturally through natural processes, but much larger, they're emitted through combustion. So we're talking about engines and factories and things like that. And those two compounds in sunlight and hot weather, they combine to form ozone. And here in Houston, we have a significant amount of both. So next
Excuse me,
slide.
Andrew. We have
Yep.
a question. We have a question.
Okay.
From Abazi Steele. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It says, what role will mass transit development and metro rail expansion play in reducing traffic and emissions from POVs to improve air conditions?
Let me get to that in a second.
Okay.
So the next slide. Okay, so these two, of these two compounds that I mentioned, nitrogen oxide or NOx and volatile organic compounds, there's two different, you can look at it as so I wanted to show this slide that shows basically where NOx is the most significant one for our region. We are NOx limited. So I wanted to sort of show where the breakdown of where NOx comes from within the region. So you can sort of look at this in two halves. We have mobile sources and we have stationary sources. Mobile includes on-road sources like cars, trucks, and buses. And non-road includes things like farm equipment, construction equipment, forklifts, so things involved with freight, locomotives, and ships. And then you have a stationary portion. Point sources, which are factories, power plants, anything that has a smokestack, basically. And area sources, which are things that they're more diffuse. So things like gas stations, dry cleaners, petroleum tank farms. These are things that are spread out over a wider area and not one specific source. So looking at this, you can see that about 60%, most of the ozone forming emissions within our region come from mobile sources. And that's why we're here today, and that's why we care about this. And this is where HGAC's expertise and knowledge lie. And so we sort of wanted to come together today to talk about what we can do as a region to help decrease at least the on-road mobile portion of this, and what any person can do. And so, you know, when you ask what role will mass transit development and metro rail expansion play in decreasing traffic, they will give people more options. And I think Deborah may have more to say about this during her presentation, but the rail, the buses, telecommuting, van pool, all of those sorts of efforts, they give more options to solo drivers to take their car off the road and to potentially decrease the number of cars on the road and increase air quality or improve air quality. So I just have one more slide. I just sort of want to say, okay, so I just gave you all that information dump. Next slide, please. One more click. There we go. Okay, so how are we doing here in Houston? Well, our air quality has improved by quite a bit. This is a chart that goes from 1999 to present day. And you can see that we've had significant decreases over the last 20 years. The line is the design value, which is what EPA uses to judge whether a region is in attainment or not. So as you can see, we've made significant progress. But these little blue lines down here at the bottom, those show the the most recent ozone air quality standards. And currently, as I mentioned, we are, there are two that pertain to us, the 2008 standard and the 2015 standard, and we don't meet them yet. So additional work is needed to be done. And this is a big problem, but I'm a firm believer that there are things that anybody can do to help move forward the case of clean air. And I think Deborah will continue and talk more about this.
Okay, Greg, let's go to the next slide, please. So with all that information that Andrew has provided, and what brings us all here today is, what can you do as a solo driver? And just keep that in mind. And let's go to the next slide, please, Greg. Houston is a car-centric region. We know that our city, our area in Texas is built on the oil and gas industry. So from past till present day, mainly the focus is on highways and byways, but there are things we're doing now. As a matter of fact, the city of Houston is developing more friendly walk places and also developing a more transit-oriented environment for us. So it will take some time, but we are working for taking strides to make those improvements. Next slide, Greg. So looking at this chart pre-COVID, you will see that 80% of people in the greater Houston area drove alone. And I know we had a question asking, what about now? So one of the things I have to point out is car sales has also increased since the COVID pandemic, mainly because many transit riders, rail riders, and even carpoolers became afraid because of the COVID. And so many people are actually buying more cars. So this is something that we really have to be mindful of, which drew us to have this webinar for solo drivers today. But I know after the census, we will have data that will show the number of solo drivers post-pandemic. The next slide, Greg. So even when solo driving, you can play a big part in helping provide solutions to being greener and helping reduce the effects that emissions have on our environment. So next slide. So there are a few things for these solutions. One, and I will explain all of these to you. You can change your route. You can shift the time that you drive, whether it's going to work or going shopping. And you can tweak your mode. And also you can make small green changes while you drive individually. Next slide, Greg. So changing your route, what you really need to do is plan ahead before you drive. So one of the things that I've learned to do since living in Houston for about 10 years, I started out when I would go to work, I worked at Metro. I would take the West Park Tollway to downtown. On average, it took me anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. 5 years later, that same route took me over an hour and a half. And not to mention coming home before, or when I first moved here, coming home, it took me maybe 30 minutes. And 5 years later, it averaged anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. But plan ahead before you drive, know your route. Stay tuned to traffic channels when you're driving. That way you can know what's going on before you get there. And also use your navigators so that you can be in tune of those traffic alerts. And another thing that I do, I listen to emergency vehicles and sounds. So if you hear, you can see, you'll know. If you see an accident ahead, you can always look for alternative routes. And also switch the time of travel. So if you can get with your employer and maybe work flexible schedules, and not drive during the congestion or high peak periods. That would also help reduce emissions in our environment. Okay, next slide, Greg. Shifting your time. So again, flexible scheduling, that will help avoid traveling during peak traffic periods or rush hour that most of us call it, and also compressed work weeks. Here at HGAC, I work a 980 schedule, so I'm off every other Friday. And working compressed work week schedules also takes so many cars off the road, but those compressed work schedules can also consist of 480 schedules or 336 schedules. And that shift is mainly our essential workers. But basically, shifting your time to flexible scheduling and compressed work weeks will help immensely. Next slide, Greg. Now, speaking a little more about compressed work weeks, what they do, they actually eliminate a day or two of commuting each week. So it actually makes your days lighter, and even though the days may be a little longer, when you do have that day off, you can take that, make sure you take that time to rest or go to the doctor or make some other appointments. But think 4 10-hour days or 3 12-hour days. But in essence, compressed work weeks reduce emissions, and it also reduces crash risk. Next slide, Greg. Now, tweaking your mode, when we're speaking of tweaking your mode, we're talking about electric vehicles, which have been on the rise in sales, and also hybrid cars. They're a very good source for transit, and also alternative fuel cars. Now, if you do choose an alternative fuel car, please try to avoid the propane type, but alternative fuel cars are a very good option as well. And also for those who drive older cars, if you're able to afford to do so, get a newer car. Many of our newer cars are already equipped with emission standards, and that would be ideal. And also try something new at least 1 day a week. So if you have to drive 5 days a week, at least 1 day a week, if you can take transit or carpool with someone or telework that day, that would help in so many ways. Next slide, Greg. So think green. So one of the things, or the main things that I want you to take away today is your mindset on thinking green. Cars are here to stay. That is no doubt. People love the freedom of getting in their car. As a matter of fact, it's part of the American dream. We love the freedom of getting up and going whenever we want to go or wherever we want to go. But thinking green will help you focus on what you're doing before you're doing it. And at the same time, you're contributing to a better environment. So one of the first things to focus on is check your tire pressure regularly. Underinflated tires can increase fuel consumption by about 3%. And it can also add another 6,000 miles to wear and tear on your tires. You can also service your car regularly. A well-tuned car can actually use 15% less fuel consumption. And you can also slow down when you drive. Driving, let's say an average of 55 miles an hour, can save 25%, consume 25 less percent fuel than it does if you drove, let's say 65 miles an hour. And then driving smoothly. So if stopping and starting, it actually just not only messes up your brakes, it also uses more fuel. And remember, avoid idling. So when you do stop, if you're at a drive-through or wherever you're going, just do as often as you can. Avoid idling. It actually reduces the emissions in the air as well. And get your car inspected annually. Not only is it a law, but car inspections focus on fuel efficiency, which turns into emission reductions. And one of the things that's really important is when you get gas, make sure you screw the gas cap on firmly. What that does is it helps reduce the gas spilling out if you make any turns while you're driving, and also reduces evaporations. And also travel light. You would be amazed that if you had 100 pounds of whatever, many people carry different things in their trunk, but actually that 100 pounds will actually increase fuel consumption by another 2%. And remove roof racks from your car. Anything fixed to the outside of your car when you're driving, it will affect the wind resistance. So try to remove those roof racks as well. And don't top off your gas tank when you're getting gas. As a matter of fact, the big advantage of not topping off will help your vehicle's fuel economy. So since our tanks, they need room for the gas to expand, it will evaporate into the vapor collection system, and somehow it causes overcrowding, and it causes less fuel efficiency. And then finally, give your car a break. If you give your car a break, it will give you a break, and it will also reduce your risk in car accidents. So try to give your car a break, and just one day, just try not to drive so much. Next slide. So again, more benefits for our commuters. Not only will you save money, and as I mentioned, with all of those tips that we provided, it all adds up to savings. Even driving slower, minding the speed limit. Not only will you save money in gas consumption, but also avoidance of getting a traffic ticket. Follow the speed limit. It also increases productivity in many ways, whether it's at home, whether it's at your job. Just having a mindset of driving green will enhance your life. And you can have a better work-life balance when you're driving green. It just gives you a better insight that you're contributing to a better environment. Next slide. And for our employers, we do have solo drivers, and as I mentioned, there has been an increase in solo driving since the pandemic. But as for employers, it can save money being conscientious of your driving habits, and also increase productivity for your employees. And again, employees who have a better work-life balance will have a better productivity. And another thing, being a choice employer will also benefit driving in more attractive employees. Next slide. Now, the benefits for our community in our region, again, as we pointed out earlier, we want to reduce car traffic congestion. We want to improve our air quality to decrease. We have a high rate of asthma and heart disease. A lot of that is due to our poor air quality. And we want to have safer roads, and all of that together will enhance our economy. Next slide. So there's ways that employers can help solo drivers, and that one of the things would be is to establish charging stations at the work site. That way they can charge up their cars while they're working. Incorporate some policies to support flexible scheduling if you don't have any, and also policies in supporting compressed work weeks. Any of those type of policies, if you need any assistance in developing those, just call me. We'll give you the information at the end of this presentation, and we'll be glad to assist you in developing those policies. And also promote commuter benefits and education programs. The Houston-Galveston Area Council Commute Solutions Team, this is part of what we do, and we will be glad to assist you in these efforts at no cost to you. Next slide. So we're at the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions, please share those in the chat box. And if you have any tips that we may have missed, please feel free to add those in there, and we'll be glad to answer your questions, and we will receive your comments.
This question, well, this is for Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew, would you like to talk a little bit about the spreadsheet that you created for us to use in our Make Your Commute Count commuter impact tool? Just a little
Sure.
bit, just a brief little snippet.
Yeah. So I guess the Commute Solutions team, they put together this great commuter impact tool that can be found on the website. And they came to me back earlier in the year just to have because they were curious to see if it would be possible to come up with estimates for how much improvements in small improvements in commute, such as working from home or taking a van pool or taking the bus 1 to several days a week might improve air quality. And so we were able to put together this game, which you can find on the Commute Solutions website, that you can get an estimate of based on how long your commute is. You can get a very rough estimate about how much you could reduce emissions by changing your commute up. And I was just looking at the tool before this, or the tool that's online just before this presentation, and I think it looks fantastic. They did a really great job on it, and I think that we have hopes to improve it and expand it in the future. So I can't wait to see what happens with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And for all those out there, if you go to our Commute Solutions website, you will actually see all of the fantastic opportunities to join in with us this month in celebrating Commute Solutions Month. And you will see that amazing impact tool, and you'll actually be able to see what impact you're making and things you can do, what you learned today to help improve your impact. Do you have another question out there, Trinae?
Yes, we do. This is from Abazi Steele again. And the question is Vanpool looking into transitioning at least part of their fleet to electric vehicles?
That's a very good question. We do work hand in hand with our Vanpool program, and they are working on finding solutions right now. And one of the considerations is purchasing their own vans at Metro and electric vehicles, because I know they do have electric vans out. That is one of the considerations that they're taking for later. And we appreciate that question, Mr. Steele. Do we have any more questions or any tips that anyone would like to share? We would love to receive those. Andrew, do you have any more to add?
No, I don't think so, except to sort of reiterate, what I said at the end of my portion of the presentation, is that these air quality and the problems of air quality, and with such a huge region that we have, it seems really intractable, really hard to see how any one person can do something. But I do believe, with some of a lot of the tips that you mentioned, Deborah, and some other ones, I think that there's a lot that can be done, and I think that anyone can have a real effect.
And it is so important. I don't think people realize the impact we're having on our planet. It's real, and we have to do something about it now. And so I know cars are here to stay, and we need our cars, but we also need our planet. So we have to be mindful on all the things that we do. For any of you, if you have any more tips you'd like to share, any suggestions or questions, let's go to the next slide, Greg. Just feel free. You can email us. You can go to our website for more information. Again, we have recorded this webinar. We will post it for you.
Excuse me, Ms. Deborah, we have another question.
Sure, you got another question? Go ahead, Trinae.
Yes, and this is from Suzanne Senegal. And her question is, does the Houston heat have an impact on our vehicles?
That's for you, Andrew.
Um, As far as oh, that's a good question. I think that as far as from an air quality standpoint, it probably, you know, I could say that probably our cars, at least during the summer, potentially emit a little bit less um, because our vehicles they emit less when they're operating at full capacity, which means that when you first start up your car, it emits a little bit more than it does when you're driving on the highway at 55 or 60 miles per hour. So during the summer, I would say that there's a chance that that startup portion of the emissions is probably a little bit less, but I'm not sure how significant that is. As far as whether the heat affects our emission systems and things like that, I don't think so. I think that the actual operations of you know, it helps warm up the engine a little bit more, which gets us to a more optimal burning of fuel. But I don't think that it makes them, it causes our emission systems or anything like that to break down. I don't believe that's the case. And I see that there's another question, but there was one question that was in the chat. About how the pandemic has affected Texas highways. And I wanted to address that really quickly. I think initially during the beginning of the lockdown period in March and April, we saw significant decreases in the amount of traffic on Texas highways. And so we think that transportation related emissions went way down for that period. And they've since, numbers have since come back up, but I don't think we've really seen any good numbers, or we've had a chance to analyze anything since school's been back. So I think the only thing that we really feel comfortable talking about is the period in March, April, and into May before school let out in the spring. And during that time, we definitely saw a decrease in emissions. We saw a decrease in the number of cars on the road, and we saw an increase in the average speed on regional roads, which, like Deborah said, when you're driving really slow or idling, or when you're driving really fast, your emissions are typically worse. So during, you know, when there was more free-flowing traffic in general and less of it, our emissions improved significantly. And again, by May, people started going back to work, and but then school let out, and so it's really hard to say, well, the summer here it's hard to make generalizations often anyway. So I can't really speak to that, what happened during the summer, but I can speak to those 3 months and say, yes, there was a significant effect. And I imagine that we'll be looking at this again over the next several months now that we're back in sort of our normal pattern, just to see, just to compare.
Okay, we have another question. You guys ready?
Yes.
Sure, Trinae.
Long pause there, huh? Okay, this is from Danny Silva. His question is, given the difficulty people have in changing from own car use to an alternative, what is the region considering to help change behavior, even to at least leaving the car at home one day a week?
Well, one of the things that we're doing is promoting webinars such as these, continuing to promote our commute solutions and educating as much as possible. We have a partners program where we focus on employers, universities, and not only employers in those realms, but also other transit agencies. We're working with them hand in hand for the Ozone Action Days and things of that nature. But through education and outreach, we'll continue to do everything we can to provide information for individuals to make the right choices, whether it's a EV or a hybrid type vehicle. We're learning, as well as everyone else is continuing to learn more about providing solutions on preserving our environment. Andrew, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I would guess the only thing I would say is that, you know, it's for a lot of folks, EVs and hybrids can, and sometimes even newer cars can be out of reach. But you know, just to add to what you said, I think that that's what a lot of this work that we're doing here today and through our Commute Solutions program is trying to help people find ways to fit this into their daily life.
Thank you so much. And I love to add that the Houston-Galveston Area Council, in conjunction with our TxDOT, and we are coming out with an app called Connect Smart, and it is focused on solo drivers, and we'll be coming out with our alpha testing later on. And I believe, Jamila, did you have something to add to that as well?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So quickly, it's a Texas Department of Transportation app. You may have heard about it. And they received a large federal grant for a wayfinding app. Think sort of like your Google Maps or your Apple Maps. Well, this particular app will do what the question kind of hinted at, and that's provide people options or glimpses of options. So if you're headed one way and you're driving, it could be that the app can suggest to you that there could be a different possibility, whether it be carpool or vanpool or transit. And so we're looking forward to the app that TxDOT's building, that we're, as Deborah mentioned, working in collaboration to get the word out about. And that should be in 2021. So that was a great question.
Oh, thank you, Jamila. Anything else? Any more tips or questions for us before we close? Well, again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Again, there will be additional resources and a recording of this webinar on our website. Go to the website, look at all those great things we're doing here at HGAC, and join us in celebrating 26 years of Commute Solutions. Everyone, take care. Greg, Trinae, thank you for all of your technical support. Andrew, thank you for joining the Commute Solutions team. And everyone, have a great rest of your day. Signing off. Bye now.